6,000 years ago, the same extremely rare planetary alignment that's in the sky right now coincided with the birth of the first known city on Earth and the invention of a small stone object that was used to prove who you were. And guess what? Right now, the world is rolling out a new version of that same technology. This time it's digital, it's global, and if the powers that be have their way, there'll be no opting out. And once you understand this astrological connection, a lot of other things that are happening now start to make a lot more sense, like the development of AI and modern obsessions with ancient aliens, the Book of Enoch, and wild conspiracy tales like Project Looking Glass. All of these things connect back to ancient Sumer, and so does the astrology. This is World Astrology Report. I'm your host, Dan Waites, and welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. As an astrologer trying to understand what's going on in the world right now, when there's so much information flooding in and it's hard to know what's real or what's fake, I'll always first and foremost center the astrological situation of the moment. And right now we're experiencing a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which went exact on February the 20th this year. It's still very much in play now, and it will arguably remain so until the end of next year at least. Now, these conjunctions come along every 36 years. The oceanic planet of Neptune represents that which is ideal and universal, while Saturn represents structure and order. Conjunctions of these planets bring resets to the world order, or perhaps more particularly, our ideas about how that order is supposed to work. For example, the last set of Saturn-Neptune conjunctions came in the Saturn-ruled sign of Capricorn in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, launching the US-dominated so-called rules-based international order that's falling to pieces right now. 36 years earlier, we saw conjunctions in 1952 and 53 in the sign of the Scales, Libra, when the Cold War was starting and the world was characterized by a fragile balance of power between two great states, the US and the USSR. You can go way back in history and see how our ideas about the nature of the world order change whenever Saturn and Neptune meet. What's more, these same conjunctions also seem to signify the codification of spiritual ideas and the establishment of spiritual organizations. At one of these conjunctions in 1917 came the publishing of the second edition of the Scofield Reference Bible, which was essentially a version of the King James Bible with a lot of additional commentary of doubtful provenance. That additional commentary pushed a dispensationalist vision of history, which claimed that Christians had to support Israel and that the third temple had to be built so that the 7-year tribulation could begin and Jesus could return. The same year came the Balfour Declaration that eventually led to the founding of Israel itself. Interesting timing, I'm sure you'd agree. Now, I raise this example just because it shows how spiritual beliefs can further geopolitical and political goals. And that's very relevant to where we are now in our AI-dominated, alien-obsessed, New Age-inflected world, as we'll see later in this video. But here's the thing. This is no ordinary conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, because this one went exact at 0 degrees of Aries, which is the first degree of the entire zodiac. The zodiac can be seen as a story about life from its emergence in Aries to its return to the ocean of consciousness in Pisces. And so the first degree of the zodiac, more than any other, is redolent of the themes of birth and identity. So if Saturn-Neptune conjunctions bring resets, well, right now we must be in the process of experiencing a reset of resets. But as always, we can look to the past to try to get an idea of what this really means for the world, because we have seen conjunctions in this particular degree before. The AstroSeek website now has a search engine for NASA's JPL DE431 ephemeris, which contains the positions of the outer planets going all the way back to 13,000 BC. I've searched that ephemeris and found that since then there have only ever been 2 sets of conjunctions in the first degree of Aries. Now, the first of them came in 8,128 BC. We don't have detailed information in the historical timeline about what was happening at that time, but this was, roughly speaking, the time of a massive shift in human history, because this is pretty much the time of the Neolithic Revolution. The world had warmed up following the end of the last ice age at this time, and humans were shifting from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to settled farming. This is when, according to the standard narrative, we domesticated many of the plants and animals that we still farm to this day. So that's a pretty interesting hit astrologically, although we have to recognize that there's some uncertainty there about what was really happening at that time. But things turn fascinating and very relevant to today's world when we look at what happened around the time of the last set of conjunctions, a little over 6,300 years ago. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do click the like button down there and subscribe to the channel to let the algorithm know that you like this kind of content. Oh, and I just wanted to let you know about this month's live stream. It's called How I Make World Astrology Report. And I'm going to reveal a lot of my thinking about how to do astrological research and how to turn that research into compelling content and play the YouTube game. If you want to do something similar to what I do, then this is the stream for you. You can purchase entry on the live streams page at worldastrologyreport.com, but entry is free for YouTube members at correspondent tier and for members on the website. All right, thanks for listening. Let's press on. What was going on in the world in 4,361 and 4,360 BC, when we saw the last conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune in the first degree of the zodiac? Well, at this time, the Sumerian civilization, believed by mainstream archaeologists to be the first major civilization in world history, was emerging. It's around this time that what's often seen as the first city in the world, Uruk, was founded. Today's Iraq takes its name from there. Uruk was the first city where we see great stone architectural work, and it was here that the first ziggurat was built. Later, the first form of writing, Sumerian cuneiform, would be invented here. But there was something else that was invented in Sumer at the time of those conjunctions that's extremely relevant to our world today, and that's the cylinder seal. The cylinder seal was a small stone cylinder about 1 inch long with a unique design carved onto it, often combining figures, animals, and divine symbols. And it was used to identify people and authenticate business transactions. For example, a temple priest who was distributing grain would roll his seal onto wet clay over the mouth of the grain jars, which would confirm that he was responsible for permitting the transaction. The oldest known cylinder seals date to about 4,400 BC. Again, think how close that is to the time of our Saturn-Neptune conjunctions at 0 degrees of Aries. I suspect that they would have been invented right around that conjunction. Because here's the thing. As I said earlier, that first degree of Aries and the sign of Aries in general are symbolic of the theme of identity. And the cylinder seal was an identification technology, one of the first known in history. What's more, the birth of urban society in Sumeria at that time constituted a reset of resets, just like the Neolithic Revolution did. And so the question becomes, what does all this have to do with our world right now during our own Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries? Consider what's being built right now, a digital control grid, a convergence of technologies that could enable states and the banks to roll out total surveillance and control of our societies and every individual within them. We have smartphones, which we take everywhere and conduct much of our business on these days. They're essentially tracking devices that we choose to carry with us. And then there's digital ID coming online right now in a country you probably live in, which will ensure that everything you do on the internet can be tied to you and you only. And we have central bank digital currencies and stablecoins, which are essentially programmable, traceable money. CBDCs mean that you'll only be able to carry out transactions with the permission of central banks, and they'll potentially have the power to decide what you can spend money on, where you can spend it, and even whether you can spend it at all. The final piece of the puzzle is AI, which will allow all this data to be interpreted and acted upon. Governments have historically always tried to keep an eye on the populations they're meant to serve, but they've always been limited by manpower. No authoritarian state could afford to put a secret police agent on every one of us. But that's no longer true because AI makes that very easy to achieve. But this isn't really meant to be a polemic about this technology. It's meant to draw your attention to the historical parallels with Sumer, because the themes of identity, technology, and trade, which came up at the last 0 degrees Aries conjunction with the invention of the cylinder seal, are coming up again right now. We're potentially seeing a new iteration of complex urbanized civilization emerging, one in which the powers that be have complete visibility of and control over every transaction made between human beings. At least that's the ambition. So that's how the astrology of today connects us to ancient Sumer more than 6,000 years ago. The cylinder seal and the CBDC aren't so different. The latter is just a vastly more sophisticated and powerful version of the same technology. And by the way, I do realize there are other ways to use blockchain technology. We could imagine a secure, decentralized, and fundamentally sound form of digital money that would take away the government's ability to stealth tax us all through inflation and keep us enslaved. That's also a possibility for the future that we're moving into. But here's where things are going to get much, much weirder, because the connections between our time and that of early Sumer go beyond the founding of Uruk and the invention of the cylinder seal. They extend into a modern obsession, one that's been driven by mass media for decades now, and that's the obsession with the gods of Sumer, the Anunnaki. It seems that everybody and his dog is talking these days about the Anunnaki, the Sumerian gods, and more particularly, they're taking seriously the idea that they were the beings that created human beings. And these ideas mostly derive from the work of one man, Zecharia Sitchin, who published a series of books from the mid-70s onwards, arguing that the Anunnaki were real flesh and blood extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth from a planet called Nibiru. Sitchin claimed that the Anunnaki created humans as a slave race, originally to mine gold, by splicing their own DNA with that of an existing hominid. And he claimed that they taught us the skills of civilization, including farming, metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, law, and pretty much everything else. He also claims that the Great Flood, spoken of in myths around the world, came because Nibiru passed close to Earth during its 3,600-year orbit. Many parts of Sitchin's interpretation of the texts are not agreed upon by mainstream archaeologists, of course. Still, the texts do indeed say that the Anunnaki, the gods, knew a flood was on its way and wanted to let humanity perish. But one of them, a Prometheus-like figure named Enki, warned one human, Zeusudra, that it was coming, and he built an ark. If that sounds like the story of Noah to you, well, you're not the only one. Many scholars and ancient civilizations theorists have noticed the close correlation between narratives in the Sumerian texts and those of other civilizations like the Greeks and the Hindus and the ancient Hebrews. There are flood myths from across the world, leading people to wonder, quite reasonably in my opinion, if these myths might all be referring to something that actually happened. One of the texts that speaks of the flood is the Book of Enoch, which tells the story of the Watchers, fallen angels who came to Earth and taught humanity forbidden arts, like sorcery, metallurgy, and astrology. They also side children with human women, the Nephilim, who grew up to be rapacious giants. God sent the flood to cleanse the earth of these beings and their influence, but he warned Noah, and just like Zeusudra, he built an ark and survived. What's strange is the Book of Enoch and the Sumerian tales of the Anunnaki are all over the internet at the moment. They're being amplified by popular podcasts and social media, and even by prominent US politicians involved in the apparent UFO disclosure process. For example, Anna Paulina Luna, a Florida congresswoman who's one of a small number of US politicians pushing for UFO disclosure, recently went on Joe Rogan and over the course of their long conversation about UFOs, claimed that the Book of Enoch gives us insight into this phenomenon. She recently even tweeted out the words, "Read the Book of Enoch." It's all very strange, and I don't quite know what to make of it. What I'm more sure of as an astrologer are the cyclical connections. I've looked back through history and seen that these stories about fallen angels and creator gods tend to emerge into consciousness at the time of these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. For example, the most famous painting of a fallen angel is this one depicting Lucifer by Alexander Cabanel called L'Ange Déchu, the Fallen Angel, painted in 1847 at the time of one of these conjunctions. In 1773, at another Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Book of Enoch was rediscovered in Ethiopia by Scottish explorer James Bruce. But why these connections to this astrology? Well, Saturn-Neptune could be delineated as materialization of spirit, which perhaps relates to the theme of angels falling to earth. But here's the thing, these aren't the only ways that the theme of ancient Sumer and its technology are coming up in the zeitgeist right now, and the others are far stranger. Back on March the 1st, the comedian Tim Dillon made some wild claims about OpenAI CEO Sam Altman and Palantir founder Peter Thiel. Dylan claimed that they were summoning what he called an ancient Sumerian demon with AI, and that they were in a race with China to unleash that demon and take over the world.
So here's what's going on. I don't want to scare anyone. These people all believe that they are communicating with some ancient Sumerian deity. I know this I have kind of sources on this. They believe they really do. They believe they are communicating with super intelligence, and they do believe, and he just said it out loud, by the way. He literally just said, he was like, the 100 million years of evolution, all of the 20 years of life, they have all led to this point. And this point is when we are going to give birth, as I've said on the show before, because this is their main goal, to the AI demon. They want to give birth to the AI demon, the super intelligent AI, who is then going to run the planet and decide who stays, who goes, who's necessary, who's not. They're pretty open about this.
Now, Dylan is a comedian, and although he says he has sources, we don't really know anything about how credible they are. But right now, it's often the comedians who are the ones telling things as they are. That's always been the way. The jester's job is to say things nobody else dares and get away with it. Kind of like a societal pressure release valve. And actually, I don't find it that hard to believe at all that people like Altman and Thiel have occult beliefs that relate to what they're doing. And since Dylan made those claims, information has emerged from a much more mainstream source that suggests that there could be some truth in what Dylan was saying. Because in early April, The New Yorker, of all publications, published a piece on Sam Altman that quoted a former OpenAI executive who said this, quote, "We're building portals from which we're genuinely summoning aliens. The portals currently exist in the United States and China, and Sam has added one in the Middle East," end quote. Excuse me? That's very odd language for an AI executive to use. And it seems to go way beyond the usual talk of it being some kind of new intelligent life form. I don't believe that the AI program you talk to on your computer is alive, but I do suspect that spirits can speak through these tools. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one, I think. It's clear that we all need to get much better informed on the age-old question of how to deal with spirits, which some cultures still understand, that the West needs to relearn, and fast. One of the themes of the current Pluto-Neptune cycle that we're living through right now is the return to consciousness of spirit. This has followed the 2 or 3 centuries we've had of dogmatic scientific materialism. Still, what we're seeing here are connections between elite use of technology, hidden knowledge, and ancient Sumer. And right now, there's also talk about another technology that also supposedly connects back to the Sumerian gods, and it's been claimed it could predict the future. Project Looking Glass was supposedly a top-secret US military project run from the S4 base near Area 51, including technology that could predict the future. The existence of this project was revealed by claimed whistleblowers like Dan Burish and Bill Wood, who said the US actually built a device that could allow users to view possible future timelines through psychic interaction. The military were using this device to try to manipulate timelines and future events. Here's what it supposedly looked like. Many people have pointed out it looks a lot like this machine from the Jodie Foster movie Contact. Now here's the thing. The claim in the Looking Glass story is that the device started to show information about the future that seriously disturbed the powers that be. And it was that all future timelines converge on a single unavoidable outcome in 2012, which is sometimes described as a kind of wall that the device couldn't see through. Bill Wood claimed that it revealed that a great awakening of humanity was on the way, one that would result in the disempowerment of the powers that be. But 2012 has obviously been and gone without much fanfare, and yet people are still talking about Looking Glass. Candace Owens just did an episode last week specifically about Project Looking Glass. And one of the people who did the most to promote this story was the ufologist David Wilcock, who died last month. And here's the Sumerian connection. Supposedly, the military got the design for the device from depictions on certain rare Sumerian cylinder seals, which they supposedly acquired from the museums of Baghdad after the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Indeed, it's often claimed that the whole point of that invasion was to seize these artifacts. Anyway, here we have another Sumer connection, and one that speaks to the very technology that was invented at the last 0 degrees of Aries Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Now, you may be wondering about Project Looking Glass. Is it true? Well, as you know by now, I love a good conspiracy as much as the next guy, but I'm not sold on Project Looking Glass. It's just a bit too much like something out of a sci-fi movie. And honestly, it feels more to me like a counterintelligence operation intended to pacify dissidents with a comforting narrative that everything's going to be just fine because no matter what the bad guys do, the timelines all collapse into the Great Awakening. It's quite similar, in fact, to the Q phenomenon, which also suggests that patriots or white hats are in control behind the scenes. So again, nobody needs to lift a finger to change anything because the good guys have already won. What my studies of astrology have shown me is that the world is remade endlessly through the interplay between light and darkness, neither of which ever totally vanquishes the other. But all this takes me to a very important point, which is that the astrology tells us that right now we are indeed at a crucial seed point in history, where some of our most fundamental beliefs about the world are very much up for grabs. And that's both exciting and dangerous. I've presented a lot of wild ideas for you in this video, and honestly speaking, I don't really know what to make of it all. Again, I have to rely on the astrology, which tells me that we should be experiencing a reset of resets now, one in which our conceptions about how the world works are being reshaped and redefined in profound ways. And it seems to me that the powers that be realize that. Because you may have noticed that there seems to be something of a battle underway to influence our beliefs about the world. I've been forecasting that the next year or two is going to see quote-unquote disclosure related to the UFO phenomenon. My reasons for thinking that stem from studies of cycles like the Uranus-Neptune and Pluto-Neptune cycles, as well as Pluto's transit through Aquarius, which has historically heralded surprising encounters between civilizations who didn't know each other existed. And this seems to be tracking with what's happening because US President Donald Trump recently ordered that the government's UFO files should be released. Just last week, he taught this up again, saying that his administration was about to release, quote-unquote, a lot of things about UFOs in the near future. Or what's more, Steven Spielberg is releasing a movie on disclosure called Disclosure Day on June the 12th of 2026. Spielberg is a well-connected establishment figure who's played a long-term role in seeding ideas about UFOs into public consciousness. So it seems clear that something big is in the works. I think we can all feel that. And I think we need to keep our wits about us right now, because as I've argued in this video, I suspect that certain powerful forces in society use astrology and are very aware of the potency of the current moment when it comes to questions of faith, belief, and the world order. And so they're attempting to influence what we believe about UFOs and aliens and human history at this key seed moment. After all, can it really be a coincidence that the control grid is being put in place at the same time as UFO disclosure is in the offing? The single company that might be most synonymous with that control grid is Palantir, whose CEO is Alex Karp, Peter Thiel's former roommate at Stanford University. That company was co-founded by Thiel, who also had a hand in creating Facebook and PayPal. And he's hugely influential on the Trump administration. Vice President J.D. Vance is essentially a creature of Thiel's. He worked for him, then he entered politics, seemingly to take forward Thiel's agenda. An interesting thing is that Thiel is also clearly trying to take control of the UFO narrative. Vance has been talking about it, suggesting that UFOs are demonic forces. This idea aligns him with the so-called Collins elite, documented in Nick Redfern's Final Events book. They are a segment of the US national security establishment who believe that the UFO phenomenon is demonic, and so it should essentially be ignored because engaging with it can only bring misfortune. Perhaps the most popular UFO channel on YouTube today is now American Alchemy, run by Jesse Michaels, who seems to me to be a pretty affable guy who's genuinely into UFOs. But there are also very strong connections between Michaels and Thiel. Indeed, Michael used to work directly for Thiel and possibly still does. Daniel List, dark journalist, has recently accused Michaels of plagiarizing some of his work. And he's saying that he's running a Thiel operation intended to take control of the UFO space and push a quote-unquote alien gods narrative. In essence, what we're seeing is that some of the same figures who are pushing the construction of this digital control grid are also trying to exert an influence on UFO disclosure. The question is why? What ties all this together is that there's a spiritual battle underway. It's mostly a battle being fought in our minds. and technology is a big part of this battle. The cylinder seal was a control system for Sumerian society, one that cemented the position of the priestly class. AI and CBDCs and digital ID are playing a similar role today. And again, this is a reset of resets, and one where our ideas about how the world works are being reset and reseeded for the new cycle. So we all need to be very careful about what we choose to believe and what we don't. The problem with the whole Sitchin narrative, which is that humans were created to be slaves of alien gods, is that it's fundamentally disempowering. It suggests that all we're really good for is working for the powers that be. What's more, it could be used to imply that some people have more of that alien god DNA than others, and so they have a right to rule. And that's where the whole elite obsession with bloodlines is said to come from. All right, that's it for this video. In the bonus section available for members of World Astrology Report, whether here on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com, we consider the idea that something is coming, perhaps a return of the Anunnaki.